I'm not sure if this is the right place for this, but this all happened a while ago with a guy I ended up becoming really good friends with. Back then I, 20, male, was originally friends with his girlfriend, Alexis, 19, long before they started dating. But over time, I became close with both of them while they were together. I ended up spending a lot of time with one or both of them during the 3 years they were in a relationship. Mark, 24, knew that he never had to worry about Alexis being alone with me because I'm gay. But this also put me in a pretty unique position, being close to both sides of the story as things started to fall apart. When Alexis started sneaking around behind Mark's back, it wasn't really out of character for her. I've known Alexis since we were kids. She lived just a few houses away, so I had a lot of chances to see how she behaved in relationships. This long history of knowing her is actually the reason I didn't get involved when she started cheating. At the time, I didn't know Mark all that well. I'd only known him for a few months. But Alexis knew I could keep a secret, so she told me everything. A lot of the time, I didn't just hear about it from her. I was right there when it happened. Now, I don't mean I was sitting in the same room watching her hook up with some other guy, though that did happen more than once. No, I was usually just in the same building or outside, knowing full well she was inside doing her thing. The only reason she dragged me along to these random places was so she could meet up with one of her side guys. She had quite a few of them. And weirdly enough, I ended up getting to know a few of them pretty well, even becoming good friends with 2 of them. From what I gathered, Alexis's infidelity kicked off with one of the 2 guys I became close with. It started off innocently enough. He began hanging out with Alexis and me more often when Mark wasn't around. He worked weird hours or was resting during the day. When Mark found out that this other guy was spending so much time with Alexis, she introduced him as her sister's friend, someone she'd also become friends with. That part was true, but the guy was definitely more than just a friend to her. And over time, he wasn't even the only new friend she brought into her life. Mark didn't seem to start questioning things until Alexis's behavior got a lot more suspicious. She'd suddenly disappear for long stretches of time, and always have some random excuse ready. Sometimes she even told him the most ridiculous lies, like he wouldn't see right through them. I couldn't understand why Mark never questioned what she was telling him. It was so obviously a load of crap. Eventually, her behavior caused a lot of tension between them, leading to frequent fights, some of which I was there to witness. A lot of those fights got pretty heated. But Mark still wanted to make it work with her, even with all the tension. And even after Alexis pulled a knife on him one night, while the 3 of us were hanging out in his kitchen, it didn't convince him to walk away. Later, he told me that wasn't the first time she tried to stab him, so I guess he was pretty much used to it by then. To make things even worse, Alexis had this habit of accusing Mark of cheating on her, even though she knew, and actually admitted to me, that he was completely committed to her. And the accusations weren't even based on anything serious. Mark could glance in another woman's direction for just a second longer than she was comfortable with, and that was enough for her to jump to conclusions. She made him stop talking to any female friends he had before they even met. He couldn't like photos posted by other women on social media, and she wouldn't even let him talk to any women directly, even if it was completely innocent. Of course, there were rare exceptions, like when he had to talk to a cashier or a restaurant server. But even then, if their conversations sounded a little too friendly, she'd lose it. In the best cases, she'd start an argument over nothing, and in the worst cases, she'd just start swinging at him the moment the 2 of them were alone. She often used these pointless fights as a way to justify avoiding him for a while, so she could go off and cheat without him suspecting anything. As I mentioned before, Alexis had a lot of guys she saw regularly. I'm not sure exactly how many, but I know of at least 7. I'm not going to get into all the drama surrounding each of those guys. This post would turn into a book if I did, but I'll skip to the last few months of their relationship. That's when Alexis's inability to stay loyal finally led to a pregnancy that freaked her out big time. She had no clue who the father was, and all this was happening just a couple of months after Mark stumbled upon undeniable proof of her cheating during the middle of her graduation ceremony. It was actually her younger sister who unintentionally spilled the beans to him, and that really crushed him. After that, Mark and I became a lot closer. We started spending more time together, and I even got to the point where I had to ask Alexis to stop telling me about all the guys she was sleeping with. I was starting to feel guilty about keeping so many secrets from Mark. There was just so much wrong with their relationship. She could cheat, but somehow still expected his loyalty. Some of the guys she was sleeping with were even the same ones Mark had considered his best friends in high school. My guilt really hit a peak when I ended up homeless and Mark opened his door to me after Alexis suggested he help me out. It was actually his parents' house, but only he and his brother-in-law lived there. He had to sneak me around his brother-in-law though because his parents, and his sister, who was married to the brother-in-law, were pretty racist and homophobic. I'm black, so I knew I wasn't exactly welcome there. I didn't have any other options at the time. So, you can probably imagine how horrible I felt knowing that Mark was taking such a huge risk for me, all while I had a ton of knowledge about Alexis's cheating, both before and after her graduation ceremony, when Mark had only found out about 2 of her affairs. I also knew what was going on, even after I asked Alexis to stop telling me anything. She promised she would, but instead, she found ways to tell me indirectly or made it so obvious that I couldn't ignore what she was up to. What stopped me from saying anything to Mark was the fact that I had known Alexis for so long. She had become like a sister to me, and up until then, she had always treated me well. She didn't show the same toxic traits in her friendships that she so blatantly displayed in her relationships, though that's changed now, or I wouldn't be writing this. But as I got closer to Mark, being her only confidant was starting to feel like too much. The weight of knowing all her betrayals was becoming unbearable. I thought I made it clear to her that I didn't want to know anymore, but I was still shocked when she found out she was pregnant and told me I had to tell Mark the baby was his, because she was convinced he would listen to me. Here's the thing, she didn't just want Mark to be the father, she needed it to be him. Out of all the guys she'd been with, Mark was by far the best candidate. Yeah, he lived at home with his parents, but it was by choice, not because he had to. He had a steady job and income, and he was still trying to make things work with her, even after discovering she cheated on him multiple times with multiple guys. But what really mattered to Alexis was that Mark's family had money. The other guys were all major red flags. They were either just as unfaithful as she was, broke, hooked on heroin, felons, underage, or just had issues that made Alexis think they weren't fit to be the father of her child. She really expected me to lie to his face about something that could change his entire life. I couldn't believe how far she was willing to go to manipulate him, and we ended up having a huge argument over it. When I finally talked to Mark, I didn't tell him anything he didn't already know. I could have, but I was still torn about the whole thing. What I did tell him was to only sign the birth certificate after they did a DNA test. He wasn't sure about it at the time, but later he told me he was really thankful for that advice, because it turned out the baby wasn't his. Big surprise, right? Their relationship eventually ended, Mark moved to another state, and we lost touch for a few years. I've talked to him since. This all happened about 10 years ago, and he seems to be doing a lot better now. He's thanked me multiple times for the advice I gave him, because his ex had nearly convinced him to sign away 18 years of his life. I honestly felt like I owed him that, since he helped me when I was in need and because I knew the ugly truth about his ex all along. He always knew I probably knew more than I let on, but he understood the tough position I was in at the time, and thankfully, he never held it against me after everything came out.